Hey guys, I'm Inverse, and this is Build Order Breakdowns. Today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of games by Sepha. As many of you do, of course, know, Sepha is a legendary Company of Heroes player. He's actually the player who originated the Volks Volks Sniper MG strategy that has been the focus of this Build Order Breakdown over the past few months. He won a tournament with it. The very first tournament he entered, and actually, or not the very first tournament he entered, the very first tournament he entered with this strategy, and actually the tournament he designed this strategy specifically for. Now that tournament he played a very tier 2 heavy strategy, pretty much went straight Gren spam with Vet 3 and 2 med bunkers right after his early game and waited for a KT. He has of course evolved his strategy a whole heck of a lot since then, and we're going to see a couple of those evolutions throughout these two games. Let's get this started, and I'll kind of talk about the general opening. As you can see, this game is South Langres. The next game will also be on South Langres, this one against Ruka Clan's Kot, a very, very good Company of Heroes player, very, very good American player, very, very good Panzer Elite player as well, but he will be playing Americans for this game. Now, just going to talk a little bit in general about this map. If you do remember my previous video from South Langres in the Build Order Breakdown series, you will know I made special note of how difficult it can be on this right hand side to keep hold of too much of the map against a super aggressive American player. We see a lot of difficulties even with some very, very good Wehrmacht players who are very, very good with this strategy, notably Aimstrong. In the most recent Sunday Night Fight season, in the series that I actually casted, he was going up against I believe it was Siberian, and got completely picked apart going Volks Volks Sniper MG in these exact positions against a very, very super hyper aggressive 4 engineer barracks start. Now Sepha is going to use some unique modifications to the standard Volks Volks Sniper MG opening in order to kind of skirt around these issues, and we're going to see in the mid and even mid to late game how his early game safety is going to introduce some slightly tricky issues in the mid and late game that might be a little bit more difficult for your average player to get around. And we're going to see a little bit of wizardry coming out of Sepha, getting him out of some sticky situations, because that's kind of how Sepha works. But pretty standard capping order. You're going to see this is the capping order Sepha likes to go on this map almost every single time. Very, very aggressive early rifle squad from Kot coming out right here, but Sepha is going to be able to connect his right hand side and get his left hand side fuel coming up. You'll notice he does prioritize fuel over this munitions, and that is largely because Sepha, if at all possible, is always telling himself he wants to go for tier 3. That's something that's very unique about Sepha in comparison to a lot of other top of the line and higher level Company of Heroes players, is just the fact that he is very, very confident in his ability to play an extended tier 1 and transition out of that into a tier 3 and still be able to counter anything his opponent can do. That's one way he gets around his early game vulnerability issues, is by extending that tier 1 a little bit, getting an extra tier 1 unit, generally an extra Volk squad, though he does sometimes, I believe this game, he'll actually get an extra MG squad. He goes both ways. I've seen in a lot of the replays I looked at in preparation for this part, he tended to evenly split between a third Volk squad and a second MG, and it's tended to revolve around the map. Now what that does is it gives him a lot of early game stability, and it gives him a lot of strength in the early mid game until his opponent gets tech out. Once that M8 comes out, it becomes a little bit tricky, and that's when you're going to see some sort of really, really fancy micro, a little bit of mine placement, a lot of reliance on mines and micro and positioning and trickery, which is something Sepha is very, 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 very good at, but something that takes a ridiculous amount of experience in order to master, and might not be a style that some of you guys watching right now are going to want to try. I do encourage you to try it, but I also encourage you to understand the risks and understand the potential challenges with playing out this strategy in this fashion. One of the main holes in this kind of style that Sepha likes to do, and we're going to see that more in the next game against Freestyler, is a weakness to very, very fast double M8 rush. And the main thing, or the main reason for that is, of course, the heavy tier 1, which lends itself to being countered well by any sort of fast M8, but the transition into tier 3 after the fact, which really exacerbates the fact that Sepha does not really have too much in the way of anti-tank or anti-vehicle of any sort in the early mid game, and not until he has a solid base of Pumas and Storms is he actually able to stabilize really against the vehicle play of an American player. And that's something else that sets Sepha apart from a lot of other players who use this strategy. Generally, you see terror or defensive used in conjunction with Volks Volks Sniper MG. We are going to see a game by Wu in the next part after this, and he is a player who really, really likes his defensive, also likes his terror, and very rarely goes blitz. And Sepha's kind of take on this is completely different. He loves his blitz, loves his storms, uses them in conjunction with his Pumas in order to give him a little bit of extra anti-tank punch, and in general leads to a slightly different dynamic in the mid game that we're going to come across in a little bit. I'm just going to speed things up a wee little bit here. Wait for the American player to show his tech. At this point, it's just Sepha pushing around, defending the territory he has, pushing up on the left-hand side as much as possible. You'll notice Sepha actually really, really likes to cap with Volks squads. That's something that makes him kind of unique to other top players. Generally, you see top players try to avoid capping with Volks as much as possible and cap with Pioneers, because they generally want their Volks to be fighting and dealing damage instead of wasting time capping. And I tend to agree with the people who say it's better to have Volks fighting rather than capping, but it is a matter of preference, and I'm definitely not going to say one way is particularly superior, inferior to the other, or anything like that. Now we do have fast bars coming out from Cot, so this won't be a fast M8 game. That will be the next one. This one, a little bit of early bar aggression, and the Volks, or the Jeep's gonna go down, gonna be forced to retreat, and we actually don't have that extended tier 1 just yet in this game. We're probably, or actually we're definitely going to see it in the very near future now that the bars have been shown. This is a very pivotal moment in this strategy, figuring out how you want to react after your opponent shows his tech. Generally, against bars, you're going to want a second MG. Against an M8, you're going to hopefully already have your tier 2 up, or in Sepha's case, tier 3, and perhaps want to supplement with an extra Volks, though that is far rarer in these situations. We do see the tier 3 coming out. Nothing coming out of the tier 2 just yet, but we don't have any, we can't afford anything, so that makes perfect sense. We're going to speed things up a wee tiny little bit. Sniper dies. No! Bloody mess. He's moving, he's moving, he's alive, he's alive! No, he's not. Poor guy. And really, really good mine placement from Cot here. But we're going to have another sniper. Losing an early sniper, never a bad idea to rebuild. Of course, Cot going to continually be applying the pressure this game, which is something you really, really need to do with bars, and something that is really, really difficult to deal with, especially in these positions going Volks Volks Sniper MG, which is what I kind of talked about in the other part, in the other section, the other part on South Langres. And it's one of the reasons why I actually don't do Volks Volks Sniper MG from South Langres anymore. I prefer an MG bike opening, which I will cover in future videos. I find it a lot more versatile and a lot easier to deal with early pressure, whereas something like Volks Volks Sniper MG, unless you do it with a extremely extended tier 1, can be fairly difficult to hold any sort of territory on either side just because of the positioning of the map. But we do have a relatively quick Puma, 11 minutes starting, so it'll be out around the 12-minute mark. Now, given the early bar tech, it is likely that Cot will just be starting his tier 2, or his motor pool, and actually already has an M8 out. So this is a very, very good position for Cot, and a very, very difficult position for Sepha. And this is kind of what I was talking about with the precariousness of, by default, deciding for tier 3. You're really, really banking on a very solid, strong early game, and if that solid, strong early game doesn't occur, you're finding yourself in a very difficult, uncomfortable position, simply because you're banking on this very, very high tier tech that can be very easily countered by what your opponent is doing, as we see right here. Cot knows perfectly well that there's not going to be any tier 2 out. He hasn't seen a Gren, he hasn't seen a pack, anything like that. And this is a perfect situation for him to push up and be super, super duper aggressive with the M8. Now Sepha doing as best as he can, pushing up on the left hand side. He's going to want to pick a side. You see he does have a Storm out, so he's going to normalize just a tiny little bit against this M8, going to make things a little bit easier with this Storm squad. He is going to want to pick a side, however, like I mentioned before, and that's just going to make things a little easier for him going into the mid game. He's going to be able to consolidate his forces and actually make a concerted effort to push one side of the map or the other. And he is, however, still being pushed back, and this is sort of the difficulty with this side of the map. And as we see right here, not really going so well. Gonna probably lose an MG. Nope, isn't gonna lose an MG, but is going to lose a Puma right there. He does have a second one, however. Now the strength of going tier 3 like this is the cost effectiveness of the Pumas, the mobility of the Pumas, and the versatility of the Pumas combined with the Shreks. Pumas with an upgun, if you can afford them, are extremely good against M8s. They're extremely mobile, which means you can react to harassment on both sides of the map very, 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 very easily. And they're extremely cost effective in the sense that you can repair them for essentially no manpower, and they deal a lot of manpower damage in a very, very short period of time. So if you can get up a couple of Pumas in a good situation and actually be able to micro them and have the freedom to do what you want with them, it can be very, 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 very powerful. The problem arises when your early game does not go according to plan, which is what occurred in this match, and you're forced to fall back on an expensive and relatively weak tech compared to what your opponent has gone, and with not nearly as much map control as you would have liked. Now 2 Pumas on the field right now, second one right here, and this is generally Sepha's comfort zone. When 2 Pumas hit, this is when he's usually feeling the most comfortable, and is finally able to push out and deal a lot of damage in a far shorter period of time. As we see right here, the MG going down. And with these 2 Pumas, Seph is finally going to definitely going to be able to push out into the middle of the map. The M8 not nearly as effective against the 2 Pumas. A lot more difficult to deal sufficient damage to force Pumas to run away when there's 2 of them. At least one of them is going to be able to do some damage, and the Storm's still able to do a decent amount of damage. However, as we can see, Cot's position very, 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 very strong over here on the right hand side. Does have an AT gun. Looks like he's focusing mostly on rifle upgrades and motor pool units, which is definitely a good way to play against this strategy and against this style. Pushing forward now. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. Stuff's dying. Sepha is still managing to push off on the left-hand side despite his relatively weak early game. Been able to do a lot of damage, push his opponent back, and actually regain a decent portion of the map. Now he's going to lose a Puma, which is unfortunate. Is he building another one? He's not building another one right now. He's going to lose that one Puma. Hopefully he won't lose this other one, but he actually might lose this one, other one. And with the Sherman out, this is pretty much going to put an end to this match. Sherman is over here. Sherman, do something. Yep, alright. Sherman's going to come in, and Sepha's not really going to have an answer to this. And this is kind of the final nail in the coffin for any sort of Tier 3 rush play. If you can't do anything with your Tier 3 at all, which was the case in this match with Sepha, you really need a critical mass of Stormtroopers, at least 2, with both with double Shreks, and hopefully with some sort of veterancy on them, if you want to hope to survive the inevitable Tank Depot transition. Tank Depot, the absolute perfect counter to the kind of style Sepha really prefers. And as we can see here, getting to it gives the Wehrmacht player a little bit of difficulty, if that was not at all obvious. So that was a loss. This was kind of an example of Sepha's very tech heavy, very greedy, and very early game reliant style. And this was an example of it not working. And I kind of wanted to show this as an example of what could go wrong, why it could go wrong, and how it could go wrong. And the next match we'll see, it's going to go a little bit differently, and we're going to see why. I'll be right back. Alright guys, let's go ahead and jump into game number 2. As I mentioned before, this one's going to be against Freestyler. Same map, same positions, also a competitive tournament match. One of these was a Sunday night fight, and one was a tournament game. I can't really remember which is which. But as we're going to see, pretty much identical early game to the COT game. Capping over here, electing for the fuel. I personally like capping this point very early. Sepha likes capping down there and getting a quick little VP boost and a quick little fuel boost jumping up there. I also personally like pushing up with the early Volks squad. Sepha instead electing a cap. Both options perfectly acceptable. Matter of preference, matter of what you enjoy to do, what you feel more comfortable with, and so on and so forth. Now, as we see, this building, when Sepha can get it, becomes an integral part of his early game strategy. We're going to see him revolve his entire early game this match around this building, simply because he was able to secure it, was able to keep it under his possession, and is going to be able to base an assault and base kind of a foothold on this side of the map around this building. And we're going to see how much easier it can get with this building in your possession to hold this right hand side, and to at least make things more difficult for the American player who's trying to push you off in the early game. As we can see, a lot of good manpower damage being dealt on that rifle squad. That rifle squad really didn't do anything in the early game, and that's a very good sign for Sepha in this early game. That's something that will always make you as a Wehrmacht player feel very good, when the rifle squad comes out and actually does not really accomplish anything. That's a very big waste for an American player. Generally, you really want, as an American player, for that early rifle squad to push off a Volks, to deal significant damage to a Volks, to deal damage to an engineer, or rather a Pioneer, push off a Pioneer. And he did push off a Pioneer, but it had already capped this point, which is the point he wanted it to cap, and the rifle only was able to decap that point, which was not at all the outcome that Freestyler would have liked in that situation. Now, as we can see, Sepha has maintained a solid foothold on the right-hand side. Now, one of the hallmarks of his play is constant harassment of this left-hand side. That's one of the most difficult parts of playing this strategy on this map, is the fact that you have this entire right side that has this point, this point, this point, has a lot of points you want on the right hand side, but the left hand side has this plus 16. This is a very, very important point as well. And Sepha is very, very good at splitting his focus and constantly forcing his opponent to divert units to this left hand side in order to defend it, which in turn weakens any attacks coming to the right hand side and makes it a lot easier for him to hold that right hand side as a result, because in all honesty, pioneers are not going to be any good in a direct engagement really at all in the early game. Even, I mean, at all at any time in the game. Not very good in offensive or even really defensive situations. So by diverting, say, this rifle squad right here, Sepha guarantees this squad over here is going to be perfectly fine. He's going to be able to push out a little bit. He knows where this rifle squad is, and he knows it's over here where it's not doing anything super aggressive, which is something very, very important and very, very crucial to success in the early game with Volks Volks Sniper MG, especially on this map. You want to limit your opponent's aggressive options as much as possible, using any means necessary to limit his aggressive potential. We're going to see that extra MG coming out right now, so this is kind of what I was getting into saying or talking about Sepha's super duper investment in the early game and his affinity for extended tier 1, namely 5 unit tier 1s, and then transitioning straight into tier 3. Gonna also take a look at his mine placement. We saw this mine last game as well. This is a very, very interesting mine placement. Most people put the mine right around there or right around here. This placement guarantees a rifle squad that's trying to hug this hedge for a flank will hit it. And this is a very, very good mine place against a opponent that you know is going to flank you or you suspect will flank you, and who you want to defend against such flanks, because this is a very, very popular area to come around, and this is an area that will have his opponent's rifles very, very clumped up, and that will maximize in most situations the damage he will take from just the blast from that mine. So as we see, getting the tier 2 upgrade coming up, we have plenty of fuel, so fuel is definitely not going to be an issue in this kind of tech boost we're going to see out of Sepha right now. He's going to be able to cap this point, and that's going to give him more than enough income to get at least a Puma, probably 2 out before he can really push aggressively and regain map control. Now, Freestyler being super duper passive, generally it's 7 minutes 30 seconds in right now. Generally, you would have seen a bar attack had some sort of infantry aggression being in the plans. As we see right now, the M8 is on the field, and he's going to slowly push back on this left-hand side. Now, against an M8 like this, when you're trying to stall for Pumas, it's never a bad idea to split up like Seph is splitting up right now. With this one Volks on the left, he's got a Volks on the right. That's actually not going to really do anything because that's a lot of rifles. But he's mining up like crazy. If you'll notice, there's a mine there. There's, of course, this mine. There's this mine. There was also a mine in his base, and this is sort of a safety measure against anything his opponent might do in terms of base rushing, which is always a good idea when you're going tier 3 against someone who already has an M8 out. Now, as we can see, another mine right there. And tier 3 finally finishing. We're going to have the tier 3 building coming up right now, and as we'll notice in the fuel, he's going to definitely have enough for a Puma. However, we do see 2 M8s on the field right now, and this is, as I was mentioning before, the main weakness to this strategy. And if we notice, just look at the units that we have on the field right now. We have 2 MGs, we have 2 Volks, and we have a Sniper, and we have 2 Pioneers. We have tier 3 building. Given the fuel, he could probably build a Stug the moment his tier 3 building finishes, but he's not really getting the tier 3 building for the Stug. He wants Pumas. He wants to do as much damage with Pumas as possible. That's the main reason for him getting tier 3, not the Stugs. So with that in mind, we have a lot of vehicles for our American player that are going to be very, very good against everything our Wehrmacht player can field. And this is when Sepha's kind of ingenuity and ability to work his way out of sticky situations comes in extreme handy. He's very, very good at situations like this, as we notice right here. Actually, I'm not even going to commentate this. I'm just going to let you guys watch. Look at that. Look at that. He killed 2 M8s. I'm going to pause for a second. He killed 2 M8s. He killed this M8 with the Faust. He killed this M8 with the mine. He has 2 Volks, an MG, a sniper, 2 pioneers, and his tier 3 building just finished. That is not supposed to happen. And that is what I'm talking about when I say Sepha is not a normal player. And that is also why I would encourage anyone who wants to try and play like this, wants to try and play extremely greedy in the early game and rely on stuff like that to survive in the mid game and reach a stronger tech. Be careful, because the chances of that happening, of course it's Sepha. And I mean, I'm not saying that was luck, not at all, because that was a mine, there was a mine here, they were very, 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 very good mine placements. But you have to know exactly what you're doing, you have to know exactly where your opponent is going to be going, and you have to be a little lucky. I'm not going to lie, you do have to be a little bit lucky. And right now, Sepha's in a ridiculously great position. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. Sepha really, 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 really likes this all-or-nothing gamble. He's either going to lose and it's going to look stupid. If he doesn't kill those 2 M8s, he loses horribly. And it looks really, really bad. And everyone's like, oh, Sepha, why'd you do that? Oh, no. But if it works, it works. And it's going to work really, really well. And as we're going to see as this game pans out, the advantage Sepha gained from that little gamble and it paying off with the M8s being killed is going to win him the game in spectacular fashion. I'm actually going to speed things up because that was actually the main message I wanted to get across right there, was holy smokes, that was ridiculous. And aside from that, we can watch pretty explosions and stuff, but that's really where my analysis ends, in all honesty, unless I see something minor that I missed on my first viewing, which I am not sure if I will. One thing interesting to note is the fact that we're going to see some veterancy soon, and Sepha almost always stops at 2 Pumas. He definitely likes his 2 Pumas, and he's going to get Vet 2 on his infantry as fast as possible, and the main reason for that is he's going to want to be using Stormtroopers with Panzerschrecks as his main AT, and also as a main fighting force with bundled grenades, using them to task his opponent's multitask, as well as deal a lot of manpower damage. And even outright kill squads. And in order to do that, he really, really, really needs Vet 2. Stormtroopers are extremely expensive to reinforce. They give a lot of veterancy when they get killed. And you want to keep them alive for as long as possible. With that in mind, getting veterancy for even just 2 Stormtrooper squads, absolutely worth it. Of course, the veterancy for the Volks, not really going to do anything. That one going to give him that health regen. That 2 only going to give him the completely blanked on what I was. Oh yeah, the sight range. That's what Vet 2 gives. The completely useless sight range for Volks for Vet 2, which is always fun when you see players who Gren spam or Volk spam and decide, hey, let's get Vet 2. Why? But anyways, I digress. Let's continue on with this replay. If you would like to watch this replay, I strongly encourage you to go download it. All of the replays I've gotten for this and the aim strong section and the woo section are available freely on gamereplays.org. So I definitely encourage you to check it out if you would like to watch it slower, not speed through it like I am doing right now. We got the Vet 2 coming out right there. That was a tricky little M8 mine by Freestyler. Actually killed the MG inside, because M8 mines actually extremely powerful, will damage the units inside buildings if they're placed right beside the buildings like that. Kind of like demo charges in that regard. But as you can see right here, only one M8 against 2 Pumas and some Stormtroopers with Panzerschrecks. Not really sufficient to dealing with 2 Pumas. Pumas do not really take a lot of damage from M8s, and they're very mobile, whereas AT guns, which are the preferred counter to the Pumas, very immobile, very difficult to move around and to counteract mobile play from the Wehrmacht player when you only have AT guns as your main source of AT. That's generally why, as an American player, you're going to want to aim for Tank Depot as a means of countering a straight tier 3 player such as this. Tank Depot is the ideal counter to a strategy such as the one we see being employed by Sepha right now. Of course, you can make it work with Rangers and AT guns and stuff like that. It's just a lot more difficult, and you have a lot less leeway in terms of manpower, because Rangers are extremely expensive in terms of upkeep and also reinforcement costs. It's fairly expensive to constantly be recrewing AT guns, which you're going to have to be doing against good players, whereas Shermans, much like Pumas, much like any vehicles in Company of Heroes, essentially free as long as you keep them alive. Excuse me. Of course, it does cost a small amount of manpower to repair units, or to repair vehicles rather, but it's essentially non-existent. It's so minor to be pretty much zero for the purposes of any sort of actual game. Now we do see Freestyler transitioning, or already having transitioned into Tank Depot, and this is when the Stormtroopers really come into play. Just the ability to run up and snipe an AT gun like that, and then just run away. Even just snipe and retreat, deal damage, kill off an M8, or an M18 rather, run away. Stuff like that is pure damage and very little cost. Of course, it does cost something, it's just not very much in comparison to the amount of damage being dealt. And is always something you're going to want to be doing if you're going for a strategy such as this, because it's very difficult if your opponent's able to amass a decent number of tanks. It's very difficult to do anything from that point when you don't have a solid tier 2 base with Grenadiers and packs to counteract that. So we're gonna have pushing up, we're gonna have a lot of Tank Depot units. Freestyler doing a very good job. The main problem with this is the extreme mobility of Sepha's army and the ability for him to harass left, harass right, and harass as much as possible while preserving as much manpower as possible. You'll see a Panther also coming out right now, and this is kind of Sepha's answer late game to the lack of AT, because as you can see, once you get a decent number of Shermans, usually 2+ Shermans if the American player is able to amass a Sherman count such as that, it becomes a little difficult to use pure Stormtrooper to deal with tanks, mainly because if the American player reacts well, he should be able to back up and save any sort of tank that gets ambushed by the storms. So you need something to chase it down. Now a Stug, not really that reliable. Panther, absolutely the preferred answer to any sort of American tier 4 play in this situation. Of course, you could also backtech to tier 2, which is definitely not a bad idea, especially because you already have the infantry veterancy. So you can use that to your advantage with the grenadiers, of course. However, that's a far more manpower intensive route to take, whereas the Panther, once again, is a vehicle. Once you build it, it's completely free so long as you can keep it alive. And that's very, 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 very huge. Manpower efficiency in the late game, very, very important for all factions, really, because in the late game, it doesn't matter how much fuel you have. Munitions are good, but you use munitions so you can hurt manpower. You need manpower. Manpower lets you build units. Manpower lets you reinforce units. If you have more manpower than your opponent in the late game, you should win. And a strategy such as this that takes advantage of very, very cost-effective units, Pumas, Panthers, even Storms that are fairly cost-effective, especially once they get Vet 3, Knights Crossholders, which are expensive to reinforce but can be very, very cost-effective as well, is very, very powerful in that regard, especially when combined with Blitz, which is a manpower-intensive faction, or not faction rather, but doctrine, because of the Stormtroopers, because of the Tigers, which are very, very expensive, both in terms of upkeep and upfront manpower cost. So let's fast forward a bit more. I'll let you guys see the end of this one. Is the end of this match. Is the Tiger on yet? No, he built some. No, the Tiger is here. Tiger, German steel. Look at you, look at you. Don't you look awesome? Dum-de-dum-de-dum, stuff's dying. No. So this is the point in the game where the Wehrmacht player can really, really aggressively push forward, as we see right here, trying to kill off as much as he can. Does not want the American player to be able to repair anything, and if something is going to be repaired, he wants it to be as little as possible. So he's going to try to be as aggressive as possible, and it's at a point like this where the Wehrmacht player has a lot more freedom to push out on the map. You'll notice earlier Sepha, content with holding his left-hand side, harassing the right-hand side fuel over here, and trying to decap or cap up the VP whenever he could. We're going to see Sepha be a lot more aggressive, actually going to throw up 3 repair bunkers, because why the heck not? And that's going to give him a ridiculous repair rate on his Panther and his Tiger and his one remaining Puma. I think you only have one Puma. One remaining Puma now with that one finally. 43 minutes into this match. Finally got that one. And at this point it becomes very, very difficult for the American player to really do anything at all, because the Wehrmacht player is just so ridiculously cost effective. If we look here, these 2 units are the brunt of the force. We have a Storm Squad up here that's pushing up and is trying to cap, but not really doing anything beyond that. It's these 2 units that are really dealing the brunt of the damage, and with these 3 repair bunkers, it's ridiculous how fast they're going to regain their health. And as we can see, Sepha just slowly sucking up the map and eventually going to overwhelm Freestyler, despite this Vet 3 Panzer Shrek squad. And that was kind of the hit and run tactic I mentioned. Running up, sniping a M18, running away, losing a single man on the Storm Squad, absolutely worth it. Do that every single day. Lots of veterancy coming out of Freestyler, but at this point he just doesn't have an answer to the Wehrmacht tanks. And it is so difficult playing against a tier 3 player in the super late game, which is a reason why Sepha enjoys this style so much, is because he has so much confidence in his ability to play out his early game in a manner that gives him an opportunity to excel in the late game. He has a lot of confidence in his ability to manage crises in the early game, despite all sorts of disadvantages, such as, you know, like not having any tech when 2 M8s come out, which is very, very tough. But as we see here, the benefits from that are oftentimes absolutely worth it, and that's the style he likes to play. It's not necessarily the style I like to play. I prefer a more consistent approach, or at least in my opinion consistent approach. But I implore you guys, I recommend that you guys try out this style. I recommend that you guys come to your own conclusions and figure out which works best for yourself and for the, that was overkill, Jesus, and for the style of play that you prefer. Freestyler is being valiant, but this game is almost over. There is so many tank carcasses all throughout the map. There's a lot of Vet 3. Nice cross holders as well. There's more bunkers going up, because why the heck not? If you can build 3, why not build 5? Make 2 of them MG bunkers, 3 of them repair bunkers. It's also interesting to note, Sepha does not build a medic bunker in this strategy. And he is one of the few players who is actually comfortable doing this at all. Generally, you don't really see top level players go a game without building a med bunker. Even if they go tier 3, it's always nice to maybe get a free Grand Squad. Who knows, you already have Vet 3. And I'm not necessarily saying don't go for a med bunker. It's extremely cheap, especially this late in the game with all these resources. To get a med bunker, I definitely I would definitely encourage people to, of course, experiment with all these different builds and figure out what works best for them, what works best for you, using these videos and using these replays as kind of general outlines for proven styles that are known to work, but that also have some downsides. And it's important to not only know the strengths of any sort of strategy you are attempting, but also the weaknesses. And this replay should end because I've ran out of things to say. No, what do I do? Is this gonna die? Yeah. That's why storms are ridiculous. They kill AT guns so incredibly fast. And as it turns out, nice cross holders kill everything so incredibly fast. Who'd have thought? Oh, okay. I really thought for a second that that was an M10. I really thought, I was like, wait a minute? That's not right. It's supposed to be an M18. But I was wrong. It was an M18. And Freestyler, save me, Freestyler. GG, yay, GG. Okay. So that's Sepha's games out of the way. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys learned something from that. I certainly did when I was going through Sepha's games, watching. It's very, very interesting to kind of analyze a style of play that's so incredibly radically different from your own in terms of the philosophical approach. Sepha's approach to the game is unlike anybody's in Company of Heroes. That's why he's had such success in such a long period of time. He's probably... Actually, I'm not even going to say he's absolutely the most accomplished Company of Heroes player of all time. And he's managed to maintain success over the course of many, 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 many years, which is extremely, extremely impressive and is a testament to the way he approaches the game and the way he goes about developing his strategies, which makes him such a valuable person to look toward for educational insight and guidance and tips and anything like that. So I do definitely encourage you guys, if you haven't before, to look up some Sepha games from this most recent patch. Watch as much as you can. Try to understand why he does the things he does. Understand not only the benefits but also the risks, the possible downsides, how they could go wrong, how they do go wrong, and how you could perhaps avoid those in your own play. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll be back in a very short while with one last video, and then we're going to finally wrap this series up for good.